Hi, friends. This is Donniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi from the Shalom Hartman Institute. And this is our podcast, For Heaven's Sake, Israel in Ceasefire. Between last podcast and this one, 500 days have passed. Today is day 502, in which many of our hostages are still in Gaza. We're coming to the end of stage one of the hostage deal. Tomorrow's going to be a really hard day, where the coffins and the bodies of the Bibas family, mother and children, are going to be returned. And Yossi and I, as we were trying to think about what should we call today's podcast, and we really didn't know, because there's so many mixed feelings. There's been so many mixed feelings throughout these 500 plus days. But we settled on maybe the most accurate feeling right now is agony and uncertainty. It's going to be a very hard day tomorrow. It was a hard day when we saw the gaunt faces of hostages who are being starved. And we know that the men who are waiting for stage two, we know in fact that they've been starved and tortured to a much greater degree. And tomorrow, even though we knew for a long time that the Bibas children and mother were killed, you still held hope, until it's not final. And tomorrow is happening. And it's not bringing October 7th to a close. It's the opposite. It's opening it up again. It's the consequences of it as it sits in front of us in a very, very stark, immediate, and harsh manner. And Israeli society, I feel sorry for us collectively, for the emotional agony and uncertainties and turmoils and feelings that we're supposed to go through, because everything is so raw. Like, nobody has any degree of separation, not because it's not it's our direct family. It's because it is yes, there's no degree of separation emotionally from everything that's happening, and it's almost getting to be too much. But today we're going to talk. We're going to try to understand where Israelis are. What does tomorrow mean? And when this podcast comes out, early Thursday morning in North America, the Bibas bodies will have been returned. And Israel will be going through a very, very difficult time. Television is trying to help us a little bit. They said they're not going to film. We don't want to see this. We don't want to. This is something, maybe saying it's too much for us. But what's also part of too much is to try to figure out where we're going, because stage one is coming to an end. 4 bodies are going to come back on Thursday. The last 6 live hostages of the stage one will be returned on Shabbat, another 4 the following week. And with that, stage one comes to an end. And then we have 59 people left. 35 confirmed dead, 24 hopefully still alive, hopefully trying to save them. But that's part of stage 2, which I want us to talk about too, because what does even stage 2 mean? What do we think is happening? So let's try to make sense of, even trying to figure out where we are as a people, what we're looking forward to, what's going to be possible as tomorrow stage 1 comes to an end, and stage 2, the negotiation for stage 2, with all of its uncertainty, begins. So Yossi, it's nice to be with you.
Good to be with you. Good to be with you in this agony.
You're my favorite person to share agony and uncertainty with. I don't know. I have no one else who I could share it to this degree. Opening thoughts about tomorrow and about where you feel Israeli society is right now.
This is one of those moments where I feel that each of us is a microcosm of the whole society, and that each of us can speak about where the emotional state of the nation is at with a fair amount of authority. And where I feel I'm at and the nation is at is that if I let my mind go toward the Bibas family, I'm this close to weeping at any moment. And there's this sense of fragileness, emotional fragileness. No hostages were as deeply embraced by Israelis and by Jews around the world as the Bibas family, a 9-month-old baby, a 4-year-old taken into captivity. It's along with 80-year-olds. It's the depravity is unfathomable, and that's all going to be coming back. And Israeli society doesn't have a lot of reserves, a lot of emotional reserves right now. So along with the agony, we're going to see a fresh outbreak of rage, which is always dangerous emotionally. Agony, suffering, but the rage, where does that take us?
Yeah, and we know who plays on that rage. The Bibas family didn't just have a special place in Israeli consciousness. They had a very special place amongst the youth and the children in Israel. October 7th, the kids, their pictures, they related to that. And in the schools, the projects, and speaking about it. And just like a week or two ago, my oldest granddaughter was saying, maybe they're still alive. She was holding, she needs them to be alive.
Right. The education ministry has sent a letter to teachers to prepare them for conversations tomorrow on this.
Because they were waiting, because our kids, this was hope, this hope. And kids could identify with the little children. And I remember my wife, who's a psychologist, was trying to begin to prepare my granddaughter. No, they're probably dead. And she couldn't hear. I said, Adina, she's not ready right now.
We're all in the emotional place where your granddaughter is. We're all children right now.
With all of the destruction, they were hoping, this was their little hope, With all the suffering, if Netanyahu wanted a total victory, I think the youth of Israel, their total victory was the Bibas children. That was the total victory. That would have sort of somehow, the barbarism and the frustration and the pain.
I was reading an interview with kids today about the Bibas family, and they were all saying, well, we don't know. We don't know yet. One 11-year-old girl said, just because Hamas says they're dead, they're playing with our heads. It's one more form of psychological torture.
I heard the same thing.
And these kids, it's so depressing. They have such a highly developed sense of the ways in which Hamas tortures us psychologically. And they said we shouldn't fall for it. They're just trying to get to us.
So
and they did. Hamas got to us. They really did. Congratulations.
You always feel the abnormality of Israel when you see the emotional strain that you have to put on kids. On us, we're damaged. We'll handle it. Life comes and goes. But when you see that, that's always the hardest. And so tomorrow is going to be a very, very hard day. But it's in the midst of so much uncertainty. And I want to just state again the issue of rage, which I always get frightened of, but especially when it gets so politically manipulated. And tomorrow is just going to be one more evidence of the fact that there is no total victory.
Where the rage plays in to the uncertainty is that we don't know how the return of the Bibas family is going to play out on the Israeli psyche. And it can go in one of two ways. It can go in the direction of Israelis saying, this is it, we have to bring them down, we can't allow them to stay in power another moment. And that, of course, strengthens the government's position of continuing the war. Or it can go in the opposite direction. We can't allow Hamas to hold our hostages for another moment, and let's just end it now. And so far, the polls are showing that there's a majority, even a strong majority, supporting the continuation of the hostage deal. But once you factor in the rage, it's really hard to know, because then people are not necessarily acting out of their highest sense of responsibility. And it's very easy when you're in that place, and I know that place of rage very well, it's easy to confuse your rage for the greater moral good. Satisfying your rage, which is about the honor and dignity of the Jewish people, is necessarily a moral good. And that's where things get tricky.
And that leads us to the second issue that we really have to figure out, because part of where that rage is going to play out is in the midst of a very deep uncertainty. Once stage one is over, and stage one was in many ways easy, because stage one, Hamas got back prisoners, its terrorist members. We got back a certain number of people, but everything else was sort of put on hold. It's true, Nitzarim, which was the most important thing that we had to carry and hold.
The corridor.
The Nitzarim corridor. All of a sudden, this permanent military presence was dismantled in, 48 hours, and we're gone, and somehow the world hasn't fallen apart yet. But it's still, everything is still in limbo. Stage two is not just about bringing back the 59 members of our family and another 1,000, 2,000 terrorists being released. It involves a declaration of the end of the Gaza war. And we know what America wants. Witkoff, Trump, it's very clear. They want stage two. They want all the hostages home. We know that. We know what many of the Arab countries want. That's also clear. I'm not even going to try to figure out what Hamas wants. But what we don't know, and this is part of the rage and uncertainty and difficulty, is that we don't know what our government wants. Our government ostensibly says we want stage two, but hostage families, when they want to really try to exert pressure or to have some clarity, they go to the Trump administration. They don't speak to our prime minister. They try to figure out, okay, Trump, are we going to get stage two? It's
so interesting.
Witkoff
If you look at the posters at the hostage demonstrations, none of them are directed toward appeals to Netanyahu. No one's appealing to Netanyahu. It's all appeals to Trump. President Trump, bring our hostages home. No one even has expectations anymore of Netanyahu.
So is it just because he can't? Is it because he doesn't want to? Is it because he doesn't want to talk? Is that because stage two officially declares the war to be over before we have the complete victory? Like, there's all these deals now. We'll talk about them in a moment, but we just don't even know what our government wants. Where are we going with this? Everybody, they're declaring, yes, we want stage two. But are you willing to declare an end of the war? That is what stage two is about.
I think that, Donniel, if Netanyahu were able to determine the next stage of events without pressure from Trump, without pressure from Israeli society, he would opt for continuing the war and sacrificing the rest of the hostages. And I say that for two reasons. The first, most obvious reason, is because he won't have a government if he gives in to the pressure to end the war now. But no less important for him is his own private war for his historical legacy. And he believes that his legacy, or undoing the disastrous impact on his legacy of October 7th, is to deliver total victory. We related to that slogan initially as demagoguery, but I think it actually reflects his deepest need, how he understands his own most urgent self-interest. And Netanyahu at this point, I believe, is motivated mostly by self-interest. Let's not say entirely. I'll leave a little bit of space for the national good, but he is looking at his legacy. And if the war ends inconclusively, if it ends with Hamas still able to claim some form of victory, that for him, I think, is unbearable. So this is where he's at right now. Where his government is at is in a more complicated place. The ultra-Orthodox parties are on record as supporting the continuation of the trade, but they won't present an ultimatum in the way that the far right does. The only ultimatum the ultra-Orthodox parties will present is for their own community's self-interest. And funnily enough, the only people that I trust in this government to be speaking in the name of the national self-interest is the far right. The others are opportunists in one form or another. But Smotrich, Ben Gvir, they mean it. They believe this is really in Israel's best interest.
But as you see, again, I'm not going to bear witness to Netanyahu's integrity, but there is an objective problem here. And it's not just when we see the starving faces or tomorrow we're going to have to take back coffins. You see Hamas in control. And 500 days of war, you do ask the question, like, what's going on here? There is a very strong natural frustration.
Yes.
When you see how, I don't know, again, how much control they have. They have enough. They still have all these Toyota Jeeps and they're able to put on shows, and there seems to be an abundance of weapons and soldiers. They're there. There's nobody else there. And so you ask, what was this for? And I wanted to share with you, there was a very interesting thing said by the chief of staff on, I think it was Saturday night, I heard it, when he was speaking to a group of Navy SEALs. And we had just seen and witnessed the hostage release show. And he turned to these super heroic soldiers and he said, don't get depressed when you see this so-called bravado of Hamas, he said. Don't buy their propaganda. When we go back to fight, they will see who we really are. So first of all, this is Halevi, who's not Netanyahu, and he's already, resigned. He has no political agenda here that he's maybe his own legacy. But first of all, it's not if, it's when we go back to fight. And somehow, he was also, they're going to see, like what we didn't do these last 500 days is one thing, but they're going to see just this one more punch, one more operation, that fantasy of somehow rectifying, changing the situation. It's a similar part to the fantasy of transfer, of somehow, transfer is they're all going to be gone. So our problem is finished. One more military attack. If we just don't do stage 2 and we just allow our army, because our army will then show them something that somehow we didn't show them before. Aside the politics, there's a very deep human need to see that. There's something very incomplete where we are right now. And I don't think our society has dealt with how incomplete the reality is.
The truth is that we don't know whether we've already defeated Hamas. We may well have already made it impossible for Hamas to effectively govern. We don't know. So yes, we see them strutting about with their weapons and in their jeeps and their masked men. Is that a government? And what are they governing? Is Gaza even capable at this point of being a coherent entity after the mass destruction there? So we actually don't know the answer to that. And this is something you and I have talked about over the last 15 months repeatedly, which is how do we know when we've won? And it's interesting that the hostage families and the committee that they've created and their support system have answered that with a slogan, which is total victory will be when we welcome the hostages home. And so that's not really the answer to the question you're raising. And I have a different answer, Donniel, because I very much am of that Israeli mindset that we're not going to let go of this war. I believe that we have to pause this war, even if it means definitively ending this stage. But at some point, God willing, when the hostages are back, we need to resume, if not in a mass expression, with air and ground forces. I want to see us move to the phase of hunting down whoever is left alive from October 7th in the way that the Mossad did after the Munich massacre. For 10 years, the Mossad continued to hunt down and killed most of those responsible for Munich.
But what is that, Yossi? Again, I just wanted to give space for it in the midst of this uncertainty, the desire to still see some military solution. We're still looking for it. So you've now come up with a nuance, because you don't want a Munich-type hunting for 40,000 Hamas terrorists. You must have some list of 10, 20, whoever it is.
I think it's 3,000. It's 3,000. Whoever crossed into Israel on October 7th, and we're able to identify. That's who we hunt down.
Yossi, God bless you. I don't want to get into debate over the desire. I would just put on the table, what does hunting 3,000 people in the midst of Gaza look like? How many battalions and how many soldiers need to be there, and how long the war needs to go on? You're still looking for some military answer, but
Yes, absolutely.
You want it. You want a little more blood. I am with you.
I want the historical record to show.
I know. But that's part of the problem, Yossi.
That they didn't get away with October 7th.
I know, I'm not arguing. I'm just saying that's part of the uncertainty we're in right now, because I agree with you.
I would say uncertainty, but I wouldn't define it as part of the problem. I think that is very much in keeping with the ethos that we've developed over 70 years here, which is that you don't get away with certainly that kind of atrocity.
I just think comparing the Munich murderers with this 3,000, I don't know, whatever. Again, I think it's just a different size operation, but I think part of what you're looking for, again, neither of us are great military strategists, so we're not going to, a serious conversation as to what's militarily possible or not.
I'm speaking emotionally, what I would like to see.
Fair enough. That's what I don't want to call it. I don't want to use the word fantasy, because that would be pejorative, like it's a debate. I hear you, but that's part of the issue. Part of the issue is, and that's, paradoxically, that's Netanyahu and a large of members of Israeli society. There's some militarily unfinished business that's in our hands to complete. And if we do that, we're going to come to some other version of a total victory. But right now, it's really interesting. If I could just shift from that way of achieving a total victory to the political discourse. And it's interesting that part of this uncertainty is last week, the central issue in Israel was the Trump transfer plan. That's all anybody could talk about. So now, Smotrich is speaking about it, and in order to accrue some political coverage, which our Minister of Defense, his commitment is to make sure that he's in the press somehow every couple of days. He gave the army instructions to put together a plan. What is this? Put together a plan? Because he's also talking about only the voluntary transfer. So there's a plan in which those Gazans who want to leave will leave. Okay, we'll leave that aside. But other than that, nobody's really talking about it anymore. The press aren't talking about it. It's sort of all the conversation that it's not going to happen has taken over. Jordan has said no. Egypt has said no. Saudi, all the people who are supposed to do it, since America's not putting money or boots on the ground, all the other boots and money have already said no. So it's sort of gone. And even today was reported that Trump officially says that was my plan. But if the Arab states come up with another plan, I'll be very happy to get behind it. And I'm sure that's what Foreign Secretary Rubio heard when he was in Saudi Arabia. So that's sort of gone. Now you're starting to have all these Arab plans coming forth. Mm-hmm. The Egyptian and Saudi plan to reconstruct Gaza with the Gazans there, put up the money. But they're all talking about, and this is where we're all getting stuck right now, they all assume that Hamas is going to have to relinquish some of its control. But Hamas has no incentive to do so. And so, like Gideon Sa'ar, our foreign minister, said something that, I don't know if it's achievable, but at least I could understand why he would say it. He's starting to speak about a demilitarized Gaza. He's not interested. He's not talking about hunting or getting rid of but there's nobody's running around now with machine guns. So we're trying to get there. But again, in order to get there, our government has to put forth a plan on how they plan on getting there. What is it that you mean to do? So our government says, Hamas we're not going to talk to anymore. We tried that and with Qatar, and that hasn't worked. We're not going to talk with the Palestinian Authority. So who is it who's going to demilitarize Gaza? How we're going to get there? We're beginning to have other conversations emerging, but it's like we're at this in limbo. And this in limbo is not a theoretical limbo. This in limbo has to get resolved for stage 2 of the hostage deal to be implemented.
Now, it's very interesting because there's an international community that's happening around us, above us, beneath us, but not with us, because we're actually not part of any conversation right now for a stage 2. And this government right now is frozen between the competing poles of the far right and the Trump administration. Now, what's interesting about this international conversation is that everyone needs some kind of a fig leaf in order to promote their plan. So the basis for all of these plans is for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza. Now, Hamas has said they'll accept the PA forming the government. Now, obviously, Hamas intends to regroup and to be the power behind the scenes, much the same way that Hezbollah is trying to regroup now and return to its place as the power behind the throne in Lebanon. But the Americans, in order to promote the PA as a legitimate force in Gaza, the Americans needed Mahmoud Abbas to repudiate the so-called pay-for-slay program, where the Palestinian Authority pays pensions to the families of anyone who murders Jews. And the PA officially repudiated the pay-for-slay
policy
program until just recently. But look, we all have experience with the PA's announcements and implementation, and no one in Israel is taking that announcement seriously. But I think the Trump administration is taking it seriously because they need that fig leaf. Now, the Arab nations need the fig leaf of a Palestinian Authority in place in Gaza in order to begin the process of investing in the reconstruction of Gaza. So everyone is looking for their fig leaf. The problem is we don't have a fig leaf that would satisfy this government. What does this government want? And that brings us back really full circle to your question. And again, I think I have a sense of what Netanyahu wants. He also knows that in order to achieve that, he's going to have to go head-to-head with the Trump administration. And Netanyahu, a nice way to put it is he's cautious. Another way to put it is he's cowardly. And Netanyahu doesn't do well up against bullies.
Right. Just to conclude, I think your observation about fig leaves is really, really helpful. And it's understandable. We don't want a fig leaf. We want something substantive. For us, this is not politics. This is not, an image. The question is, how do we continue to live? If it was just a fig leaf, I'm all in. What fig leaf do you want? I'm in. I think it's not just the Netanyahu government that doesn't know at this moment of agony and uncertainty what it wants, or maybe, as you said, it does. I think Israeli society doesn't know. Mm-hmm. There's a closure that we see is eluding us. There is no plan put forth that someone said could give you a different closure or a different form of victory. And as you said, for a large part of Israeli society, the only total victory at this stage is the hostage release. But right now, that total victory and the other total victory of removing Hamas are in conflict with each other. That's the essence of the dilemma of stage 2.
And Donniel, the release of the Bibas bodies is a pathological parody
of this situation.
Of closure, yeah.
So with all of this uncertainty, let's all just wish the Bibas family, all of Israel, strength tomorrow. And seeing 6 live people coming home on Shabbat might help a little bit. And we're going to need a lot of, I don't want to say we're going to need clarity, because we're not going to have clarity, as we're entering into a period of profound, profound uncertainty. And it starts tomorrow with the agony. Yossi, it's good to be with you.
Good to be with you, Donniel.
This is, for heaven's sake, Israel in ceasefire, day 502.